Thank you so much, Pastor. You always give me a big head. Thank you very much. Let's start with a question. Who can tell me who is the greatest Bible scholar?
Satan.
Thank you, Doctor. Exactly right. Satan. As much as we think we know the Bible, Satan is the master of knowing the Bible. And believe me, Satan is always looking for ways to trick us in a way that's not put in the Bible. The Bible tells us what's going on, but these days Satan trying to find a way to trick us so that we cannot get the things we need from the Bible. And today's sermon is about that. Now, when I was young, my dad, who's also a minister, he's basically my hero, and everything I learned from him. He used to tell me that at the end of time, science and spiritualism are going to join hands. And I always used to wonder, how can that happen? How can a scientific age like today become interested in spiritualism? Well, today we're going to look at that. Today we're going to look at all the things Satan is doing to bring about a new world religion. And some of this stuff, of course, is going to be a little disturbing. I'm sorry if it will disturb you, but it needs to be known. It needs to be heard. So we're going to go back to the original. Now, when we come back to the Bible, after the Tower of Babel, what happened? There was a king called Nimrod. He and his wife, Semiramis, they tried to establish a one-world kingdom. And that one-world kingdom was worshiping Satan. That is why they decided to build the tower so that they would not be attacked by another flood. Ellen White tells us that. And also because they thought that by building the tower, they'd actually be able to go up to heaven and overthrow God's kingdom. And how did God stop this? He confused their tongues. It is God's plan that the world does not unite under one religion and one government. And that has been Satan's plan to beginning. One religion, one government with him as the king. And we're going to look at some things. Unfortunately, we don't have the projectors. I had some very interesting videos and pictures to show you, but we're just going to have to leave that for some other time. Now, let me get started. The first world religion, the very first one, after the Tower of Babel, was the religion that was started by the Sumerians. They were the first civilization. They existed in the Tigris-Euphrates area. They were the ones who first introduced the idea of God to the earth. Now, in their theology, and some of this will be surprising, the head god was called Anu. Anu. And he lives on a planet called Nibiru. This planet revolves around our sun once every 7,600 years. So each time the planet revolves around the sun, these gods from that planet, they come to Earth and they take over the Earth once again and start establishing themselves as the kings of the earth. Satan and his angels obviously were these gods. And in the beginning, they used to appear to men in physical form and convince them they were gods, so they would worship them. This was done with the Sumerians. It was done later on with the Babylonians. And if you look at the world religions up until the introduction of monotheism, you will find out that all of them were the same religion, same story, same ethics, but with different names. The Indian Hindu godheads, the Roman godheads, the Greek godheads, Babylonian ones, Chaldean ones, Aramaic ones, all of them were the same people, same stories, but with different names. Each culture took that religion, changed the name, and made it its own religion. So until the time that monotheism was introduced, the worship of one God, all of these religions were worshiping Satan and his angels. Okay? That is why God had to choose a completely new people to start a new religion. And he chose, as we know, the Hebrews, brought them out of Egypt, and taught them monotheism. So the first religion, I have to explain this to you so you'll see the parallels. Anu was the creator God, but Anu was also called El. E-L. Now who's El? I'm sure all of you know, we've talked about this. Who's El in the Bible? It's the biblical God. His name is El. Elohim, El Shaddai. That's why all the Old Testament names had El somewhere in them. Elijah, Elisha, Joel, Samuel. Everything had El in it because they believed El was their God. Okay? The Hebrews of the Old Testament, even though God came to Abraham and gave him a new religion, they were still heavily into the worship of the old religious gods. They were. And they tried to introduce those into the Bible, but fortunately, by the coming of the prophets, all of that was pushed out. So you have Anu, who is El. He had a wife. They had two sons, Enlil and Enki. Enlil was the older one, the one who had the birthright. Enki was the younger one who was a rebel. Now listen to what happened. These gods came to earth from their planet Nibiru. Why? Because they needed gold. Gold. So they started mining gold from Africa. Africa. Have you ever wondered why Solomon is always famous for having huge gold mines in Africa? Why? And even in the book of Genesis, it refers to the land of Havilah, which is the old name of Africa, and it says that the gold there is very important. These ideas were being pushed in by the early Hebrews from paganism into the religion that God had given them. And the prophets had to come to fight it. So they were mining this gold. But they got tired of the hard work, so they said, okay, let's make a slave who will do the work for us. So one of the gods voluntarily gave up his life. He gave his body to the doctor of their group. She cut his body into pieces and used his blood, mixing it with genes from other people, to make a slave. Someone shorter, dumber, but still in the likeness of them, humanoid, looking human. That person they named Adamu. Not Adam, Adamu. And that person was their slave to mine the gold, take care of their gardens, etc. Now because of this, many of today's so-called historians claim that the biblical story came from the Sumerians. It didn't. The biblical story is actually much older than the Sumerians. Now I'm telling you all of this because this ties into the new religion they're trying to establish today. And it's going to get a little difficult. They created man to be their slave. And then man rebelled against the gods, so the gods decided to destroy man with a flood. A flood. But now remember the two brothers, right? Enki and Enlil. The one who was the older one was who? Well, yeah, I'm sure you don't remember. It was Enki. Enlil actually liked the humans they had created. He didn't want them to be destroyed. So one day in his palace, he sat next to his window and he called his favorite human slave on the other side of the window. That human slave was called Anapishtum, which in the Bible is called Noah. He told Anapishtum they're going to destroy the world with a flood. go prepare a boat. So Anapishtim went and prepared a boat, and he took 2 of each type of animal into the boat. Then the flood happened, and because Anapishtim was faithful, Enlil granted him eternal life. So he became immortal. Now this is the old religion, the first religion that existed on earth. It was the religion that was being followed by Nimrod, his wife Tammuz, and their son. Okay? That religion has been kept alive throughout history, from one civilization to another, until Christianity and Judaism were introduced. Please follow the line, this is crucial. When Judaism and Christianity were introduced, that line was cut. And the world religion became Christianity. The biggest biggest religion in the world today is Christianity. From Christianity came Islam, who believes in the same exact God, the same exact religion, the same exact stories, except they say that Jesus was just human, not God. That's the only difference between their religion and ours, believe it or not, if you put all the politics aside. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, these 3 religions, they came from the same source, from Abraham, who God gave a new religion to. That doesn't mean that the old religion is dead. In fact, the old religion is alive and well. Now we get into the heavy stuff. This was just introduction. Once a year in California, there's a special forest called the Bohemian Grove. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. In that forest, once a year, all world leaders meet for a whole week of meetings. Nobody knows what happens in these meetings. Nobody's allowed in. No press is allowed to cover the issue. It's all in secret. But 5 to 6 months after the meetings are over, suddenly all the world governments start establishing new laws. This happens in the secret meeting there. One reporter was able to go into the meeting by acting like he was part of the retinue of George Bush. He was able to lie and say he was part of George Bush's group. He went in. When he went in, what he saw shocked him. They had a giant statue, a 30-foot statue of an owl, and they were dressed up in black robes like the Ku Klux Klan, and they were sacrificing something that looked like a body on a fire in front of the owl, and they were chanting. That owl is Molech. Molech was the ancient Babylonian god that had the head of a bull, and it had arms outstretched like this, and people used to throw their babies into the belly of this statue that had fire. They would burn their babies alive as a sacrifice to that god. That's the god Molech. They are still worshiping this god on the higher levels. It's satanic worship. Satanic. One of the emails that Hillary Clinton supposedly gave out, and they caught it, you remember there was a big scandal about her emails. One of them is a message from her to her secretary saying, today afternoon, please sacrifice a chicken to Molech. Why? This was the time she was trying to run against Donald Trump. It was election time. And she was hoping the god Molech would give her the victory, which obviously we know he didn't. So this thing is going on. There's another time during the year that they all meet in Europe in a hotel called Bilderberg. All the world leaders meet there again. And again, over there, they have secret agendas no one can see. And there is a lot of evidence to show that in these secret meetings, there's witchcraft, there's prostitution, there's pedophilia, and there's worship of demonic entities going on. That is why you cannot reach above a certain stage in fame or in power or in government position without becoming one of these people. And if you want more on that, there's a lot of evidence. You can easily look it up. Especially those who get into the music industry. You cannot become rich and famous without becoming a servant of Satan, making a literal contract with Satan. And these entertainers, they actually admit it. They say, yes, I made a deal with the devil. So on the higher level, the world leaders, there's no Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. It's all the worship of Satan. And they are still keeping this oldest religion. Now, why are they keeping that? Because Satan still asserts that he, as the first creation of God, is the legitimate Son of God. Not Michael, who later on became Jesus. He claims he is the legitimate Son of God. That the other person doesn't belong there. And the Bible writers took great pains when they wrote the Bible to make their people realize that they should not follow this old religion. To do that, they put a lot of stories contradicting this idea. Cain and Abel, right? Cain is the firstborn son. God rejects him. He accepts Abel. So what does Cain do? Kills Abel. You have the story of Abraham's son. Who was the son? Isaac. Ishmael and Isaac. Who was the older one? Ishmael. God rejects Ishmael. He chooses Isaac. You have the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau is the firstborn son. Jacob tricks him into selling his birthright. You keep going down. Joseph in Egypt, when he had his two sons, his father came, and instead of putting his right hand on the older son, he switched his hands and put his right hand on the younger son, giving his blessing to the younger son. You go further down, you have the story of Ruth and, I can't believe I forgot her name. No, not that Ruth. Sorry, not Ruth. Mary and Martha. Oh, sorry. Mary and Martha. Who's the older one? Martha. Who's the responsible one? Martha. Who's the careless one who became a prostitute? Mary. And yet Jesus blesses Mary. Right? Story of the prodigal son. The older son stays home, faithfully takes care of his father. The younger son runs and wastes everything, and still the father blesses the younger son. All of these stories were put in there by the prophets under God's guidance to remind the Israelites that this first religion is false, that Satan is not the legitimate heir of God. He is not the legitimate person to inherit the earth. It is Jesus. And that is why Jesus came. Now that philosophy, that religion is still being pushed today by the leaders in these higher organizations. Don't fool yourself. It is still spiritualism. And this is going to be added to science. Now this is the next part, which is the important part. How are these ideologies going to supplant or fight against Christianity and become one with science? How many of you have heard of the double slit experiment? Anyone? Okay. Scientists wanted to discover what an atom is. What is the atom made out of? Now all of us have grown up in school with a picture of an atom, right? There's a nucleus and then there's all these electrons going around it, right? Now they're saying that's wrong. There's no such thing. Now there's two views of what an atom is. Two. And it's based on this experiment. They took a sheet of metal and made in the middle of it a slit, an opening. And then they had a machine that would shoot atoms at this piece of metal, one atom at a time. So they started shooting atoms at this piece of metal. Some of the atoms went through the slit and hit a photographic plate in the back. Are you following me so far? So they were shooting atoms, went through the slit, hit the photographic plate. What did they discover? They discovered that at the end, on the photographic plate, as expected, there was a line. Why? Because the atoms that went through the slit made a line in the back. So they concluded, okay, this proves that atoms are matter. They're tangible. They're something that we can touch. Somebody said, well, what will happen if we make 2 slits? He said, okay, let's try it. So they made 2 slits, and they started shooting atoms. And then they were shocked. Instead of getting 2 lines in the back, they ended up getting waves in the back. Waves, like the waves in the ocean. Meaning that the atom isn't solid, it's energy. So they're saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? How can one experiment say that it's an atom, it's a solid, and the other experiment is saying it's a wave? One of these is wrong. So they said, okay, let's observe what's happening. So they put a very sensitive camera at the very slit to take pictures of what's happening. The moment they put the camera, you know what happened? Both slits produced lines. The atom went back to being solid. How? Is the atom deciding what it's going to be? Now they're saying scientifically, yes. When you come to the smallest particles, they don't exist. Which means this whole body here does not exist. It's a quantum fluctuation. What does quantum fluctuation mean? It means that there's no physical matter. It's all some form of energy that can't explain. And the moment you look at it, it comes into existence. I know this is a little heavy, but please bear with me. This is how they're integrating science into spiritualism. So what they're saying is, there's nothing that exists. There's only a field of energy. And when you look at that field, you make it come together and form an object. In other words, our observing energy makes matter develop. So now you have all these books going around. We create reality. Our mind creates reality. When we look at something, we make it happen. No, it's not true.